Hey guys, it's Chris with Nichols Retirement Empire. Beautiful day. I'm on the way home from Cedartown. I'm headed back down to Richmond Hill. And I was in traffic when I was back in Atlanta here a little while ago. And my mind started kind of rolling there. Sometimes, when I get in traffic, I think a lot. And I came up with a new nightmare for the 70s for you guys. Little throwback Saturday. I guess it's Saturday. I don't even know what day it is. But let's talk about music, the radio. Nightmares from the 70s, the radio. Now, the way this all worked is it's not like today. Like today, everything's about the phone. Everything's about the computer. Everything's Wi-Fi. Everything's all this kind of stuff. This is why this is a nightmare for people that are young today. This would be an absolute nightmare for these things to happen. Number one, when you grew up, this is probably the way this evolved. When you grew up, the only place in your house where there was a stereo that picked up radio stations or could play a record album or maybe cassette, and let's not do 8 tracks. Let's not go back that far. I don't want to go back to where we're, making music with sticks and rocks. Okay, let's just start with the cassette era. But anyway, there would be a entertainment center, which included a television, a stereo portion, and a record player LP portion. And it was huge. You couldn't move it. It would take 4 or 5 people to move, all that kind of stuff with the TV. So it was a center of entertainment. So all the music that came out of the center of entertainment was pretty much chosen by your parents. So if your parents grew up in the 50s, they might listen to a little bit of rock and roll or whatever, but generally that probably wasn't what you were getting to hear from the entertainment center. If you lived in a place that was close enough to town where you could even pick up a radio station. But anyway, I digress. You would go to school and you'd start hearing everybody talk about they like the Eagles, or they like, these different groups. They like Foreigner. They like, they like this. They like that. Have you heard this song? Have you heard that? And you'd be like, well, I need to hear that song. So the only time that you could listen to the stereo is when your parents were either gone, which, or something like that. Then you could try to pick up. Well, you had to know where to put it. So in the Chattanooga area in the 1970s, 80s, early 80s, there was one station that just ruled the whole area, and that was KZ106. And everybody knew KZ106. Everybody knew the phone number to KZ106. Everybody knew what KZ106 played. It was like that was the station. Period. And so maybe when your parents were gone, you could turn the stereo on KZ106. And then, of course, you'd have to turn it back to whatever. You'd have to memorize whatever they had it on, so you wouldn't get caught with leaving it on KZ106. Your dad turned it on, and Supertramp was playing. He probably wouldn't like that. But anyway, that was it. And so when you started getting old enough to where you realize, I want to rock. I need my own separate music. Okay, so when you got old enough, maybe you could get a radio, a little portable radio, and I mean little. Now, nothing. You weren't getting a stereo system for your room. You get a little radio, and then you could, maybe play it at night, real low, where nobody could hear it, and you could listen to, Dr. Demento. He'd be playing the Talking Heads and Blondie. It's you got a different kind of music late at night while you were listening to it when it was quiet. And then as you got older, you got old enough, you got a car. Now, the cars, stereo systems, because if you were a teenager in 1980, for example, you were driving a car that was made in the 1960s, probably. early 70s if you were lucky. And I can go ahead and tell you that the stereo systems for those vehicles are not on par with what you get today. They were horrible. I mean, practically non-existent. And so there was a whole industry around putting car stereos in cars. It's kind of hard to imagine that today. Because there are places that still do it if you really want a souped up crazy sound system. But back then, just to have the stereo, not even cassette, but just the stereo and speakers, you'd have to go buy it and install it, because chances are you could. And what was really bad is because if you didn't have a bunch of money, you bought a cheap one, and within 2 weeks you'd blow the speakers. So everybody's riding around with their speakers cracking and whatever. You couldn't listen to it. Like, if you really wanted to listen to it loud, you couldn't do that. And so, that's where you'd be. You'd have a car with a terrible blown stereo system, but the car was not made for that system. So you'd have to do all kind of things. Your car would look terrible. The dash would be all messed up and everything, because you had to figure out some kind of way to get that stereo to fit in that dash. Anyway, it was a nightmare. So anyway, that was how that rolled. But we all had it. We all had stereo. You had to have that. That was an absolute necessity. No matter what, you had to have some kind of stereo system in your car, whatever you could get. Then, maybe as you got a little older and, your parents felt like you could handle it, you could have stereo system if you could buy it, and it would have the stereo and the LP. It wouldn't have the television. Okay, you don't want that. That's too expensive. And you could have it in your room. Now absolutely had to include headsets. Now, not earbuds, it wasn't Wi-Fi, it was headsets. And you needed it to be close to your bed, because you could only listen to the headsets as far as the cord went. So you'd have to have it near the bed so you could plug it in and listen to it, without disturbing the house with your music. And so, if you had the new Bob Seger album, your mom and dad didn't want to hear about the Night Moves or any of that stuff. So you had to have that. That was completely, totally essential. And once you had that, then you pretty much were independent, and you could start buying. If you had money, you had a job, you could start buying albums or cassettes. And that in itself was the whole, there's nothing like this now. Now everything's done on the phone. Everything's, the internet. But back then, if you wanted an album, you would have to go to a record store, or you could go to Kmart, because there wasn't a Walmart yet, and you could go down there and they would have the records. But if you really wanted to be, cutting edge, you needed to go to a record store, and there were only so many record stores. They weren't on every corner like Dollar General is now. You had to go to somewhere like the mall, where the record store was. And the record store was awesome because it had all the albums. You could look at all the album covers, and you could look at all the songs that it had listed on it. And they would have posters, and they had everything. All the stuff that you needed to rock was at the record store. And if you went to the record store, chances were all you had to do was go pick up an album, start looking at it, and women would show up, because that's where all the girls were. They were at the record store, and everybody was at the mall, because that's where the record store was. So that's how you got your music to rock with. And that was a great experience. And having that record, of course, you had to be careful. You didn't want to buy something, because if you had $20, say you worked and you had $20 extra, then you could get gas for the week. You could eat out, at a fast food place a couple of times, and you could buy an album all with your $20. And you didn't want to buy an album like if it was a new group and they had one song and it was just so honest, love, this is the greatest song ever, and you bought the album and the rest of the album was terrible, that was disappointing. So, you know, you had to, you know, it was good to hear maybe your friends bought the album and then you could listen to it, you know, that kind of stuff. So it was a completely different experience than now. Now you can just listen to all of it, pay a small amount, have whatever kind of music you want, anytime you want, you know, stuff like that. Now back then you couldn't just hear whatever you wanted anytime you wanted, anywhere you wanted. That it just didn't work like that. You had to be in your room or in your car, or, you know, if your parents were gone, you could just listen to stuff whenever. You could call down to the radio station. You could go to the phone. It was attached to the wall. And didn't you have the handset you could walk around? No, it was plugged into the wall, and then there was a cord plugged into the phone. You could only get as far away from that phone as the cord would go. But anyway, you'd go and you'd physically dial the numbers, and you'd call KZ106, and you would say, hey, this is Tim from Signal Mountain. I want to hear Dirty White Boy by Foreigner. You know, hey, this is Nancy from Hickson, and I want to hear She's Always a Woman by Billy Joel. This is so-and-so, you know, whatever. And the guy, you know, that was the DJ would play the song. And he would say, you know, this is Allman Brothers Band Whipping Post for Lafayette, Georgia, you know. Or he might say your name, if you wanted to say your name, you know. This is for Stephen from Red Bank. Give Me 3 Steps by Leonard Skinner. Whatever, man. It was the Wild West. Anything could happen. And that's the way you got to hear what you wanted to hear. You either had to buy the album, buy the cassette, play the song, or you had to call the radio station, and, you know, that's the way it worked. That's the way it worked. And if you wanted to hear your music, then that's what you had to do. And you had, you know, if you like country music, it was real country music back then. Whenever I think of country music from the 70s, I smell cigarettes and taste sausage biscuits, because my grandmother would listen to country music when she would pick us up in the morning and take us to her house so we could go to school, because my dad would take us. She worked third shift, and he would go into work, and then she would pick us up from third shift and take us to her house. And she was always smoking. We always got sausage and biscuits, and we were always listening to country music. So, you know, it's Johnny Cash, cigarettes, sausage biscuits, menthol cigarettes and sausage biscuits. And that's the way I hear that kind of music. It's real country music back then. I mean, if you listened to it back then, you were either going to be, you know, your wife was cheating on you, your dog left, your car, you know, it was sad. That was sad country music back then. Well, it wasn't all sad. Sometimes you were building a car made parts that you stole from the factory over a period of 30 years, something like that. Or, you know, it was a song about, I don't know, it could be fun. It didn't have to be sad, but a lot of it was pretty sad. Drinking, you know, you'd have to be drinking, you know, to say this kind of, you know, country music. So anyway, you had your country music. If you wanted to listen to that, there wasn't a whole lot of choices. And the thing that I wonder about, you know, because, you know, we grew up back then, and if they played something that they called classic, like if they were playing The Doors, or they were playing, you know, some older Led Zeppelin or some older Rolling Stones or whatever, something like that, you know, that would be, you know, from the 60s. So when we get really, I always wondered, because, you know, older people listen to completely different kind of music. So I wondered, I'm like, well, at what point am I going to listen to completely different kind of music? When am I going to listen to Frank Sinatra? You know, when am I going to listen to this stuff? And I guess that we aren't. I guess when I get to be 80 years old and I'm down at the old folks home, I'm going to go into the little rec room, in the old folks home, and they're going to have the entertainment center with stereo and all that, and then we're going to be listening to, Kansas and Bob Seger. We're going to be listening to all this old rock. That's what they're going to be playing over the the loudspeaker. That's what they're going to be playing over the speakers and stuff for us, is all this old music, I guess. What do y'all think? Is that what's going to happen to us? Are we going to be in there listening to, Billy Squire in the old folks home? Is that where we're bound to? Is that where we're headed? Because I don't know what else I'm going to listen to. Of course, you got like the people that listen to like yacht rock and all that kind of stuff, and so it is a little more mellow, and they like to, I want to hear Chicago, and I want to hear Boss Skaggs, and I want to hear all this kind of lighter, slower stuff. So maybe that's more what it is. Maybe that's what we're headed to, and then all the, the other stuff is going to be left out. No hard rock. Maybe. I don't know. But that's the way it was. That's the way it was back then. And if you wanted to be a rock and roller, it took a little bit of work. It wasn't as easy as it is now. You guys, you kids, you got it made today. Thanks for watching, guys.